moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch, and there's 1 week left from when you're listening to this to go ahead and back Gemini Jump. It's going to close on Friday, November 5th. And this is a comic made by Larry King. He's done indie comics for a while. He's got a pretty cool little style, very unique. And we did a comic, tried to make it as cheap as humanly possible. $10, you get the comic, and that includes the shipping. And we're going to include some free stuff in there. But you can also get the digital copy and all the rest. So hope you enjoy the comic.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. I don't know if you've had a chance to do it yet, but certainly want to welcome you to fund and back Gemini Jump. It's a comic book from Larry King. It's right up there right now. A link to this should be in the description of this video, so check it on out. It is fully funded. You're getting the comic immediately. It's not just fully funded. The better news is it's fully printed. It's sitting in bags, already bagged and boarded. Several of them are already in boxes. Waiting for an address label to be put onto it, which is going to happen the day the campaign closes. So you can get a book really quickly. Go check it out. Obviously, link in the description of this video. Good stuff. I've gotten a number of questions around this, and it is really about kind of where is the money going? There's this, I think one of the challenges with comics, and this is I'm speculating here, but one of the things that I think is happening where comics are concerned is that it's hard to wrap your head around this thing that is in many ways a cottage industry, yet is working with world-renowned brands that are some of the hottest in all of entertainment. It is weird to think about. The scale doesn't, people's minds have trouble mapping to this. And as a result, I think they come up with some strange conclusions about where everything's at. But basically, if you look at it this way, Batman has brand recognition that is known around the world at this point. Most regions know Batman. Batman as a property is a multi-billion-dollar entertainment and licensing property. If you look at all the movies that have come up, the cartoons, the shirts, backpacks, I mean, just selling the logo, the Batman logo on a shirt in Walmart or Target is going to make a huge amount of money. More money, in many cases, than is often made off the comic book itself. And that's where the trouble comes in. And Batman is one of the top-selling books where we usually see sales over 100,000 for that title. But let's take a close second, which is Superman. Superman, arguably in many places in the world, actually has better brand recognition than Batman. Right now in Tokyo, for example, in Japan, I don't know about right now, but I can speak to it from 4 years ago. The Superman logo and the Superman license had more recognition than Batman in Japan, and this is true in many regions. And they're both doing very well. So you're splitting hairs if you're trying to argue which one has more. But Superman is selling quite well as a brand, as a license around the world. It has a lot of billion-dollar value as a property. The comic, meanwhile, when Bendis was on that, we saw several comics were in the high 30s, low 40s for sales. And what that means is, let's just use an even number, 40,000 people bought the comic. 40,000. If you start to think about that number, you realize how tiny it is. That is a astronomically small number of people buying a world-renowned brand. Now, the problem there isn't the brand, of course. It's the floppy. It's the comic itself. It's that property isn't doing particularly well. And if you go all in, 1 month of Superman selling 40,000 copies at $3.99 is going to make $159,000. $159,600. Let's call it $160,000. Okay. Except DC isn't making all of that. They're making, basically kind of, all rolled in, a quarter to a third. They're making about, on that comic, selling at 40,000, they're making maybe $45,000 off that comic. Maybe that's even a little high. That's their cut, but not counting expenses of actually paying out the people who are creating it and drawing it. How much profit are we really making off this comic? It's probably, maybe 20,000, maybe probably even less than that, actually. If I'm working it down, we're probably around 10 to 20 profit off of this book, all in, and that's including you get second printings and you have other things going on. So it's very little money, I guess is my point. If you think about rent, I mean it's always good to equate these things to something that or something that you're aware of. So if you think about your rent, if you're living in downtown Seattle, for example, you're paying for a nice apartment $1,600 a month. All right, that's you living in a place. Your food expenses, I don't know, $1,000. I mean, it all depends on kind of what you're into. But my point here is, if your profit off of a comic book starring a character that has world recognition and is one of the strongest brands in the world, and I think Superman, as of again 3 years ago, his logo, that crest, and that property was considered a top 20 on almost every list and a top 10 on many lists, up there with like Mickey Mouse, Spider-Man, characters that are really, really powerful in terms of licensing and brand. And so the struggle here is that people have a really hard time going, well, on one hand, this is $1 billion property. On the other hand, in a month, producing a comic, going to all the trouble of getting all the people involved, because comics is a team effort. You got an editor, a writer, and a colorist, and an artist, and maybe a penciler and inker. Maybe that's the same person. You got going to the printer, and it's got to be put in a box. It's got to be shipped out around the country, and then it gets sold, and we make $10,000 of profit off of that book. And that's, for one of the big two companies, that doesn't seem like a lot. And certainly it's not a lot when you look at the movies, when you look at the industry. And again, if you just look at literally taking that logo, putting it on a t-shirt and selling it around the world, the t-shirt business is much better. It's got much higher margin on it. It's doing much stronger. So this fact is you get a very distorted view of business and the world very quickly. You're having to wrestle with the fact that you got this massive property that everyone knows, world renowned, and on the other hand, it's making close to nothing in terms of profit from a comic book perspective, which is the origin to this character. And so I think a combination of all these facts, it's just very hard to mentally wrap your head around it. And that's why you get so many people speculating on what's going on. It's why you get I don't want to say conspiracy, but people are grasping for reason. Like, it can't be true that this $1 billion property is only able to pull in 40,000 people, in the majority of the world who are willing to buy this. That doesn't make any sense. 40,000, again, is a small town. That's not a big amount of people when you think about a national and maybe global distribution of these properties. It's tiny. And so with comics, this is the fundamental challenge it has right now, is that since the death of the newsstand, comic books retreating back into the direct market, it's doing the opposite of what you expect, and it kind of defies good business logic, good business sense, because you'd expect that as movies come along and as more licensing comes along, I would go out on a limb and say this: the character of Batman, the property, the license of Batman, is more popular today in 2021 than it was in the 80s when that movie came out, when that Michael Keaton film came out. Think about that for a minute. You might disagree, by the way, and that'd be fair. But worldwide, more people are aware of Batman today than back then. Batman as a license does more, and part of that's because there's more products that you can buy. The toys advance, the shirts advance, video games are here. We've got lots and lots of ways that you can monetize Batman. There are certainly plenty of ways. You had toys and you had shirts, certainly back in the 80s, but there's way more now. There's more product available. There's more ways to get that product. I would argue that Batman's more popular, yet, despite the fact that it's more popular, the comic books have gone the opposite direction. They've gone backwards. And this is where, people will often point to ideology. It's because comics, dipped into SJW agendas and that kind of thing. But really, that's not the true culprit here in terms of why it's gone backwards. It's all about distribution, because plenty of people are going out and buying Batman They're buying T-shirts. They're buying clothes. They're not worried about the ideology. And what ideology do you think about when you're going to a store and you're buying a shirt with a Batman logo on it? There is no ideology to speak of. You're buying a cool logo on a shirt because you like Batman. That's it. Your feelings about the brand are strong. If you pick up the comic, first of all, you have to find it. And this is again where the data tells us something. People aren't running to comic stores, picking up the comics, and then saying, "Well, this is garbage. What's with all this political stuff?" It would be nice in some ways if we were getting that feedback, but we're not. We're getting nothing. Why are we getting nothing? Because nobody is finding it. People aren't getting to the comic shop in the first place. It's not about the content inside the comics. It might be if more people were actually finding the comics, but they're not. Moving away from the newsstand basically cut the distribution at the knees. There's no way for it to grow. Now let's explore an alternate reality, a multiversal reality where comic books stuck with the newsstand. If they had, I give this basically this proposition. My guess is most comics, the big names anyway, Batman, Superman, X-Men, Spider-Man, etc. My guess is they would be selling over 1 million regularly. I think the numbers of the 90s would have been easily eclipsed. Because I think a couple things would have happened if they would have stuck with the newsstand. First of all, the distribution would have remained intact, so we would have seen more product out there and more eyes on that product. Because there were greater volumes, I think the price would have stayed lower. The fact the price has risen is very much in part because we saw a pullback of there's less volume. With less volume comes less price incentives, and with less price incentives comes higher prices. That's what we got. If you would have kept comics selling at a higher volume, i.e. the newsstand, the cover price would not have risen like it had. Also, I also throw this out there. Because comics are smaller, it has allowed basically creators who are maybe less skilled in some cases, or maybe ones that really have a story to tell or an idea, an ideology to push, if you will. Back to that argument. When you're dealing with smaller volumes, when you're dealing with smaller things, when you're making a comic that's going to sell to a niche audience, it gives you the freedom to talk to that niche, to basically first of all, people are paying a lot less attention to it, but also you're writing for the niche, which is what's going on. If right now you had comics going out in grocery stores and in gas stations and wherever, and basically the newsstand, now I grant you the idea of the newsstand in general has changed a lot. Would spinner racks even be possible in Safeway? But let's just assume for the moment we're continuing down this alternate reality world. Let's assume that they were. If you had those kinds of volumes, if you had more eyeballs on it, if you had more skin in the game, more customers, more retailers besides just comic shops, where there was actual money, actual volume on the table, then you would see a different publishing approach. You would not see writers writing to the niche audience because it isn't a niche audience anymore. You would see a lot of concern about, hey, if I'm going to make these Trump jokes, if I'm going to put Trump Modoc in here, I need to be a little cautious about that because I'm selling into red states and blue states. I mean, I've got the entire newsstand to worry about. I'm not saying it would end because certainly you've got plenty of politically charged content on Netflix, on Disney, on other places. You definitely have it, but it would be a little bit more thoughtful. People would basically pause before they go through it. And a lot of people, I think here's part of the argument I want to make is that if there's lots of people who say, there's politics and agendas in place in like Star Wars films. All right. Are they as blatant and obvious as some comics that sell 20, 30,000 copies? Not even close. Why? Because at the end of the day, even though Rian Johnson did his thing, even though Disney may have their own ideas, it's selling to a much higher volume. I'm not saying the stuff goes away. I'm just saying it's handled at a much different level. But the overall challenge with comics is that the economics have gone pear-shaped. It's backwards. You have and for a lot of people, you can't even mentally wrap your head around it. How are you, because it doesn't make any sense. How are you supposed to, on one hand, see these things that are making billions of dollars, world renowned, logos and everything everywhere, ubiquitous in terms of approach. And on the other hand, you have comics selling, under 100,000. And again, I have to stress, selling on average, and for the big two, I think the average number is somewhere in the mid 40s right now. That's a terrible number. That's a very small audience when you think about a worldwide global audience. And this is not because the comics are one way and the movies and the brands another way. People aren't finding the comics in the first place. One thing the numbers do tell us, and I really want to stress this because this does pop a little bit, a lot of what you hear on YouTube and other things. You are not seeing this traumatic fleeing from comics. You're not seeing customers walk away from it in droves suddenly. It's that last word that matters here. You are seeing an erosion, certainly in customers. You are seeing some titles succeed, some titles fail. Yes, you see some Comic-Con numbers that show that the numbers are all up. However, other things, like we've talked about in the past, other things are lumped into there. But what you're also seeing in the numbers, if you look at 20 years, is you're not seeing a cliff. In 2017, when Donald Trump was elected, and a bunch of comic creators flipped out and were angry, and that material got into the comics, you did not see this sudden plunge of sales. You didn't see the numbers tank. You would have expected, if it was ideologically driven, that you would have seen a 30-40% decrease in comics. You didn't. You don't even see that year over year. You don't see this free fall. You do see an erosion. What I believe that data tells us is that people are not finding the comics in the first place. People who are buying tend to keep buying because they're collectors. And if they're eventually driven off, they're driven off kind of one by one, slowly. They're not driven off in mass. The problem is distribution. And I think distribution is the problem that if you solve it, solves many, many problems, including kind of the artwork, including some of the content. I'm introducing a couple different things here, and I think it's a very interesting debate to have. I could certainly put on a completely different hat and argue the different side of several of the things I've just said here. That's kind of the fun of this topic. But think about it for a moment. It's one, we're presented with a very unusual and very impossible situation. Massive, popular product can't move comics. Not at the levels in relation to its popularity. That's a problem, number one. Number two, what is the major culprit? The major culprit, I argue, and I argue extremely hard. Number one, like if you were playing Family Feud and you had the little list of things, a lot of YouTube channels, a lot of commentators, a lot of articles will tell you it's ideology. I would tell you it's not even close to ideology. It's distribution. It's number one is distribution, underlined, bolded, whatever it takes. That is the fundamental issue with comics. Comics are hard to find. I don't know about close second, but number two, it's price. If you solve distribution and then suddenly the comics we have now are in the stores, you still got this problem that $4.99 is no longer an impulse buy. Distribution and price make up 90% of the problem. If you solve those two, everything else starts to topple like dominoes. And I'll play it out this way. This is game theory. If you go the other direction and you say, we need to change the ideology in comics. Okay, the problem is too left wing. Okay? I'm not sure that is the case, but in some cases, yes, I do. Sure. But if you solve that today, great. Now comics are centrist. They're not talking about politics. The stories are exactly what you had in the 80s or whatever time period you liked, 90s. Do comic sales double? No. I don't think they do at all. Even if all the people on the internet complaining about this, who hate it, come back and they start becoming regular customers, it's a tiny fraction still of the audience you need. Comic sales aren't going to double. You have to solve distribution. You have to solve price. If you solve for both of those, I think everything else gets a lot easier. But by all means, argue with me. Let me know where it's gone wrong. Like I said, this is a tough, tangled conversation. You can argue it a couple different ways. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. So let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.